Good afternoon, good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, depending on where you have joined us on the African continent and beyond. It's exactly 3 o'clock, 3:19 GMT here in Accra, Ghana, and we are so excited to bring you the AIEforum, and that is the maiden edition. And wherever you join us, we appreciate your time. We know there are a lot of things happening, but you decided to spend the best part of your moment with us, and we do not take that for granted. So today is going to be insightful, exciting. I am super ready for the learning experience that we're going to share today, because we have the best of experts assembled together to really take us through the topic for today, and that is accelerating intra-trade for Africa. And we are using the capacity development approach. And this theme is related to the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So you will agree with me that as a continent, we have already started trading among ourselves, which began 1st of January 2021. The AFTA headquarters is based in Accra, Ghana, and it is a market connection among 1.2 billion people on the continent, with a combined GDP of $3.5 trillion. And it's so much important that as young people, as experts, as captains of industry, as private sector players, we need to discuss how best we can take advantage of this opportunity, of this market, to make sure that we maximize our potential and ensure its implementation towards the overall goal of the African Union, that is the Agenda 2063, the Africa we want that is driven by Africans. And AFTA is the homegrown solution developed by us, for us, and we need to drive it ourselves. That is how come we need to build our capacity to maximize our potential. And so today is exciting. We have all the speakers available on the platform, but I would want to take this opportunity to acknowledge our partners. We have the All Africa Student Union, that is ASU. ASU is the biggest student body on the continent. So anything you want to know about student development, student activism, and support for students on the continent, ASU is there for us. We have yen.com.gh, and yen.com.gh is an online news portal, and they are also supporting us with the streaming of this product as well. KenTrade is a trade facilitation organization based in Kenya, and they are one of our partners. Duapa Africa is the capacity building institution. So everything capacity development, everything capacity building. We have Duapa Africa. And the last but not least is the AFTA Policy Network. And so everything that has to do with the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, AFTA is here to support us. My name is Kwesi Sam, and I work with the Association of African Universities, and I know that you're also excited to be here. We have just want to settle a little bit protocol. If you want to make a comment, all you need to do is to put in the chat board, and at some point we'll read out for you. If you are not speaking officially, please make sure that your microphone, and we don't want to hear the feedback going on within your private space. But if you are given the right to speak, you unmute, and right after you mute as well. You can also join the conversation via social media platforms using a hashtag, that is AIEforum and AIEforum 2021. You can visit www.aieforum.org, and everything that you need to know about this forum is there for us as well. To help us understand the Africa Continental Free Trade Area more and much more better, we have put together an excellent presentation or presentations. We want to let people know what AFTA is. So AIE Network, we always want to educate, inform, and transform the continent and its people. Basically, we say that the change starts with you. And so our first topic for discussion for the first, for the maiden edition is accelerating intra-continental trade through capacity development. And we are privileged to have Mrs. Irene Asari to be the moderator. But let me just share with you something very little about Irene. Very fantastic. So Irene is a human capital expert and the founder and chief executive officer of Calvin Clay People Development. And that is a Pan-African human resources consultancy that specializes in human resource advisory services executive recruitment, and leadership development in Africa. So as an HR generalist at heart, Irene's holistic understanding of strategic human resource management expertly prepared her for a high impacting career journey, and which we can confirm that prior to Calvin Clay, she was a director for the business services function of one of the largest oil and gas operators in Ghana, across Europe, and then in Africa. Irene's focus on transformation is evident as she has led significant organizational change and effectiveness programs in the telecommunication, banking, real estate, manufacturing industries. Wow. Throughout her extraordinary career path, she has a focus on people, and the organization has always remained constant. Known around the continent as a change agent, she has been a business partner to CEOs, MDs, and many senior business leaders, where she effectively challenged the status quo on placing HR at the center of many business decisions. Thank you very much. Our first panelist to be introduced, not in any particular order, is Ms. Rose Rona, and she is a Director of Trade Facilitation at the Kenya Trade Network Agency, Kentrade. Just a little bit of her. Rose Chepecheche Rona is a passionate international trade professional with over 16 years of working experience drawn from both the public and private sector in Kenya. She is the Director of Trade Facilitation at the Kenya Trade Agency Network Kentrade, a Kenyan government agency that implements and manages the Kenya Electronic Single Window System, TradeNet system. The system has revolutionized the logistic value chain in Kenya, saving the country's upward of 2.5 billion Kenya shilling. And according to the World Bank, IFC, Kenya Single Window Impact Study of 2018, an achievement she proudly associates following successful implementation. Further, she has led her team in the establishment of the first trade information portal of its kind in Africa, and that is www.infotradekenya.go.ke, a portal that provides information on how to do trade in Kenya and with Kenyans. All right. Possessing extensive experience in trade facilitation, trade policy, cross-border trade, regional integration, change management, customer experience, marketing, and communication, she is an enthusiast of the African continental free trade area. And it's an enthusiasm born out of a strong belief that solutions to problems plaguing Africa are within the concept of increasing intra-Africa trade through the implementation of the AfTA. This led to her active participation in negotiations for AfTA, development of the implementation strategy for Kenya, and hands-on capacity building of the business community on how to ready their businesses to take advantage of this agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged to have Ms. Rose Rona. The next panelist to be introduced is Mr. Louis Yao Afo, and he's Executive Director of the AfTA Policy Network. He is a trade practitioner with strong private sector skill, a member of the technical working group of AfTA, Ministry of Trade and Industry here in Ghana. He was a member and rapporteur on a private sector consultative team involved with the CFTA agreement, now called the African Continental Free Trade. Currently, the Executive Director of the AfTA Policy Network, the largest international free trade NGO focused on implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Women in Africa Network. So ladies and gentlemen, our next resource person to be introduced is Mr. Louis Afo, who will share the slides with all of you so you could learn more of who he is and what he does. The last but not least is Mr. Frimpong Musa, and he is a CEO of Duapa Africa Group and former officer of the AU Commission. So Musa has over 15 years of experience in many human and organizational development disciplines, including profit and non-profit management, human capital and youth development, leadership and community development, and entrepreneurship and innovation. He has founded, led, and coordinated several development organizations and projects across the world, especially in Africa, and travels will travel to over 12 countries across all the 5 regions of Africa, as well as Turkey, China, and the USA. He is an alumnus of the African Union Youth Volunteer Corps and the US State Department International Visitor Leadership Program with a professional visit across the US. All right, so just a bit of his educational background. He has a BSc in mathematics from Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, a postgraduate certificate in youth development practice from C4YDS Lusaka, Zambia, and a certificate in graphic and web design from Istanbul Chamber of Commerce in Istanbul, Turkey. His cumulative 15 years of professional experience across the world with diverse cultures, teams, and background have prepared him to lead many organizations with great project success. He's a published author and has won several awards and recognitions. Ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged to have Musa as part of our panelists today. Thank you, and I wish you a fruitful discussion. Over to you, our moderator.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And good afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm very privileged. My name is Irene Asari. I was introduced before as your moderator, and I'm looking forward to engaging with our distinguished moderating team. So hopefully, if you are there, panelists, please feel free to switch your cameras on so that we can see you. And I was really pleased at the beginning that we had this wonderful introduction. I don't think sometimes we get the opportunity to do that. And I want to know that you are still with us and still very much engaged in the conversation that we're going to have. And let's utilize the chat box. So I just want you to kind of just send me a hi just to see that you're there and that you're going to help us as we go through the conversation. And really, as an HR practitioner myself, I'm very passionate about the topic. You know, capacity building for us on the continent and looking at the youth as we do this is an awesome opportunity for us to really talk about what that means. And of course, I think many of you on the webinar today are probably having all of these questions that you want answering, and we can do this in a really safe environment. So I'm looking forward to that. And please feel free at any time to send us questions in the chat box. There'll be time at the end and we'll do a little bit of a Q&A so that we'll do our best to answer those questions that you have. But for now, what we're going to do, if you stay muted, I'm just going to engage with the panelists and we're just going to have a bit of a conversation. And then from there, we'll open up the opportunity. So I will start with Mr. Affle. So good afternoon, Mr. Affle, and I hope you're doing well. And the question really for me is, so the African continental free trade is expected to be the world's largest trade area, which I think we all know. And I know that Mr. Affle, you're in charge, you're the executive director of Policy Network. And what we are keen to know, first of all, just to get us started, is what is AFTA? And what does it mean exactly? Could you just take the time to explain to us really in layman's terms so that we can understand what does it mean? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, Irene. Thank you. Good afternoon to a colleague, panelists, and all to all who are participating from all around the globe, and also this afternoon. Thank you very much. To the layman, the agreement was called the Continental Free Trade, and I'm glad that we have a large chunk of people that are in the student arena, so it's good to break down. The agreement was called Continental Free Trade Agreement, and that Continental Free Trade Agreement produced what we call the African Continental Free Trade Area. So once the agreement was adopted, and this agreement has been envisaged many years ago, and this agreement is a Pan-African single market dream or an economic integration dream where Africans will trade among themselves more than they do with the world. That is the fundamental aim, and it has traveled so many ways, so many rounds, has gone through so many processes, and it was based upon some of the prototypes of the regional economic blocks. So you take the ECOWAS, you could take the East African, you can take the SADC, something all from all these bits and pieces were put together to see how AfTA could look like. And so that was the background concept. And the purpose was for all 55 countries to be part. However, we have a process of who becomes an AfTA country member. And so 54 countries have signed, some have ratified, and some are full state parties. We call them full state parties. Full state parties are those who have gone through process 1, process 2, process 3, signing, ratification, and depositing your letters of ratification with the African Union Commission. That makes you a full party state member of AfTA, or an AfTA trading member. And it was important to know that though you can sign, if you are not a full party state, you cannot trade with a non-state party actor. And so the focus was to boost intra-African trade. When we say boost intra-African trade, certain pillars were established to ensure that we all follow that pattern to trade among ourselves. We call them the BIAT, boosting intra-African trade. 7 pillars that the ministers of trade recommended to member states to really program themselves nationally or factor it into their national strategy. So the AfTA is a single market approach of boosting intra-African trade, exporting among ourselves, not just raw materials, adding value to make sure that we also work upon the comparative advantages that we used to have, but we're not taking opportunity. So in a single, so this agreement was finally adopted in 2018. It was signed, but it came into effect, and it came into effect about 2 years ago. And let us create a difference. The trading started just this year, 2021. Last year, I think this year, 2021, January, that is when this trading started. But the agreement came into force almost 2 years ago, because the agreement stated that on the 22nd member country that submits its letters of ratification, the agreement is deemed into force. And so one of the protocols that were supposed to have started was free movement of people. And to rest my case at this time, the agreement was built upon protocols. There were 3 phases that were supposed to really drive the structure of AfTA. We call it phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And the phase 1 had to do with trading goods, trading services, and then looking at the free movement of people. However, phase 2 has not really been negotiated. It's in the process. Phase 3 was supposed to be what we call e-commerce, but because of COVID, it has been fast-tracked to actually come along with phase 2. When phase 2 is going to deal with investment, competition policy, and then intellectual property rights. This is very key. So for now, we have phase 1, trading goods, trading services, and then the free movement of people. This is what is happening at this time. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mr. Apple. I think that's given us a lot of kind of thoughts. There's just one follow-up question I want to ask before I move on to my next question. And I assume that we didn't have this before. I think you mentioned ECOWAS, and we had all of these other agreements. I'm assuming that this, I think you said, supersedes all of that, because we didn't have this before, right? So this is very much a different agreement.
Yes, there was existing regional agreements. There were existing regional economic communities. They were trading all right. We have the SADC, we have the ECOWAS, we have the Arab Maghreb. All of these Pan-African blocks were already trading. The only difference is that the African Continental Free Trade became a continental block, an umbrella for all of them. And per article, I think Article 2 of the agreement, it says that the agreement is going to be governed and built upon the regional economic blocks. That means that it's not going to do away with the existing ones that are there, but it's just going to be a mother block for all these agreements. That is the difference.
Okay, All right. Thanks so much, Mr. Apple. Really appreciate it. My next question goes to Miss Rose. Good afternoon, Miss Rose. How are you doing? You're just on mute. If you could just unmute yourself.
Thank you. Afternoon, I'm well, and thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I feel I'm at least in good company because you're another female, and so we're going to rock this panel together this afternoon. So Rose, you are an international trade professional. You've got extensive experience. We saw it in your profile around trade facilitation and trade policy. So please tell us, from a policy perspective, what does this mean? Often, policies are out, we're very distant, we don't quite understand it. Help us understand, what does this actually mean for all of the African countries?
Thank you for that question. And I think it's a really important question because it's not business as usual in Africa anymore after the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. And why do I say this? I say this because prior to the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, most of the African countries basically focused on getting their commodities or, doing trade with countries outside the African continent, doing trade with China, with the UK, with the US. That was the focus. There wasn't so much focus of trading with each other, and that's why you could see there was a study that was done by UNCTAD some time back, which showed that intra-Africa trade is around 16%. Trade between African countries is around 16%. But when you go to Europe, trade between the European countries is around 70%. When you go to Asia, it's around 61%. So you could already see that there isn't so much trade, between the African countries. And why don't we have so much trade between African countries? A lot of it is because of colonization. Our colonial patterns or our colonial masters, basically, the trade around Africa was designed to get goods out of Africa. So that's why you can be able to see, even between ourselves, we don't have the right infrastructure. We don't have, roads connecting us to each other. We don't have, efficient borders and ports. So it becomes even very difficult to trade amongst each other because the cost is very high. It is easier for you to trade, we know, with the US. It's easier for you to trade with Europe because those routes are already established, as opposed to trading with each other. And it was with this wisdom that the African Union came up with the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is an initiative that member states will encourage the member states of the African continent who are signatories to this, there are 54 of them, to actually trade amongst each other. And how has this been done? This has been done by removing tariffs. Tariffs are taxes that you pay when you do international trade, when you export and import. The tariffs have been removed in 90% of the product lines. So it makes it much easier for you to trade with another African country. Initially, if you're not within the same regional economic community, for example, if I'm in Kenya and I want to trade with Nigeria, the taxes would be very high, the tariffs would be very high, and that would discourage me from trading. In addition to the tariffs, the infrastructure of getting my goods there would be very, very difficult. By the time my goods are getting to the Nigerian market, they're very expensive, they cannot be able to compete. So that was that is what is behind the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, opening up trade and also removing non-tariff barriers. And what do I mean by non-tariff barriers? In addition to tariffs, because now tariffs will be removed, we have the non-tariff barriers. These are complex customs procedures, several licenses that you're required, to be able to produce, standards that you're required to meet from different countries. And the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement commits to harmonizing this and removing most of these tariffs to be able to make them much easier for each any person who is interested to trade in the African continent to be able to trade. The African Union is also investing heavily in infrastructure, the road network, the railway network, making it easier for airlines to fly into each other's space, just ensuring that it is supporting the development of this, the implementation of this agreement. And back to the question that you asked me, you asked about policy. And I said it is not business as usual in Africa. African countries that have signed this particular agreement or are signatories to it and have ratified now need to change their policies, their national policies, to align themselves to this agreement, to align themselves to ensure that they are working towards implementing this agreement. The agreement will not be implemented will not be implemented by the Secretariat alone. It is up to individual member countries to come up with national strategies on how they can be able to take advantage of this. Remember, there's going to be competition. You know, whoever will move fast into the other market is the one who's going to make it. So it's important that African countries, first of all, start by coming up with national strategies to implement this agreement. Once you have come up with the national strategies, then you also need to, if I know most African countries have their national trade policies, the national trade policies now need to be aligned to ensure that they are supporting the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. So on policy, that is what I'm expecting that will happen. And a lot of those policies need to be geared towards making the beneficiaries of this agreement understand how they can be able to take advantage of this agreement. 80% of businesses in Africa are SMEs, and SMEs need to be, they need to be shown, or they need to be capacity built to ensure that they're able to take advantage of this agreement. Not only capacity building in terms of providing information, but also connecting them to finances, so that they can be able to take advantage of this. If I go ahead, I think I'll talk more than is my fair share. So I'll take it back to you.
No problem. Thank you so much, Rose. We really appreciate it. And we'll certainly come back to you. That's really very insightful. I'll go now to Mr. Musa. So good afternoon, Mr. Musa, and I hope you're doing well.
Good afternoon, Irene. I'm doing very well.
Excellent. And I think we've just been talking about policy. So I think you know the question that I'm now going to come and ask you is Africa ready for this?
Thank you, Irene, and good afternoon to Africa and the rest of the world. Thanks to the AIE team for putting this wonderful engagement together. And it's always exciting to join brothers and sisters across the continent and the diaspora to think in one direction. I think since the OAU was formed in 1963, I think this is the first time Africa has really come together to think about one direction. We know what the beginning, when the OAU was even being formed, the Casablanca bloc and the Morovia bloc. So even at the onset of the formation of the OAU in 1963, we didn't have one direction. But I have sat in the Africa Union Commission compound. I've been involved in the various high-level summits that has really given birth to this particular policy. So I think looking at my time at the AU for the past 5 years, I think Africa has woken up to the reality of the time that is either we wake up and take our development into our own hands or it will never happen. On the after itself, I would say yes, based on the background that I've given, that African leaders, as I have sat with them and engaged with them at the AU Commission compound, I see a new wave of leaders who are ready to give Africa a new identity and a new development path. And looking at when the AFTA has also come in, I think the African continent and the diaspora has also received the policy with open hands. The no part comes at the implementation part, because a lot of work is easier said than done. We have written a good policy, we have done a lot of celebrations around it, but now it's about the proper implementation. It's about getting, trying to get goods from saving Lagos to Cairo, trying to get goods from Nairobi to say Cape Town. This is the implementation part. So we are going to look at how the policy is going to come up. And for me, I look at, first of all, investment. Have we done a lot of investment? I have come from China, where I've seen industrialization at the highest level. I've seen technology. I've seen how e-commerce is playing a role in trade. I've seen how they've invested in the human capital of the economy, and all these enablers are what really makes trade important. We still have barriers, artificial borders crippling the continent. How are we going to make sure we pull these artificial barriers down to allow people and goods to move across the continent? So on the question of are you ready, we have a yes and we have a no, depending on how we look at it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Musa. I think that was a very diplomatic response because I'm sure there'll be people in our audience who would say, yes, absolutely. And there'll be people in the audience that say no. So I think you played it safe there, but thanks so much because I think you gave us a balanced perspective. As we've said, we've already touched on AFTA, and then we're going to start talking about the local entrepreneurs on the continent and what's the point of there. So I think that Rose mentioned that 90% or so, 80 to 90% of our continent is full of small, medium-sized enterprises, right? We're very, very littered with that. And I know prior to the pandemic, we had limited access to financial resources and support. And you can just imagine well, we're not even in post, we're very much in the pandemic. Situations have got slightly worse. So with AFTA, what support can SMEs access and how do they go about that support?
Thank you for the question again. I think that if we look at AFTA as a wealth creation agreement, it will really help us very well. Then if we move away from the literature and the theories of free trade. Before AFTA and now, whatever was happening is still happening. Well, the way things existed, they're the same. The only difference is tariff liberalization. 90% of goods are going to be having a kind of progressive zero tariff over periods of time. And that is great because every economy is supposed to be an export-driven economy. It's supposed to be a manufacturing-driven economy. It's supposed to be an industrialized-driven economy. That adds value to your products. And so you realize the majority of this bracket is not found mostly in Africa. What the Continental Free Trade Agreement seeks to do is to enable an environment where there will be a lot of startups, there will be a lot of value addition that will propel manufacturing. And so about 90% or 80% of most businesses in Africa is SMEs. But the focus is, there is the need to really strategize and what I said, BIAT, boosting intra-African trade. Now it's going to be on country by country. So like Rose said, if you don't take seriousness to this strategy, you'll be left behind. For example, it is important for SMEs to identify the import substitution structure of their various countries they belong to. What do I mean by that? If we are all selling and trading the same raw material, then there is no benefit. Nigeria should benefit from the raw materials I don't have, or I have, or they don't have, I send to them. So you identify a product, you identify the market, and after identifying the market, you now form an association. Prior to this, most SMEs were national based, but with the coming of the Continental Free Trade, in terms of their support, it's going to be continental. At the recent summit of the African Heads of State, they tasked the AfriExim Bank and other institutions to support this drive. And so the AfriExim Bank has created two windows, what we call the public sector facility and the private sector facility. The public sector facility is to support governments of these party states who might have lost as a result of this immediate jump of this agreement in terms of tariffs losses. Then the second part has to do with the private sector facility. Is what AfriExim Bank is going to do. AfriExim Bank is going to push a lot of finance to financial institutions of these member states. Then these financial institutions are going to push that money to associations, SME associations, SME stakeholders, groups that have decided that we are coming together and we have this common goal. For example, you can have coconut value chain people, you can have orange value chain people, agri-processing, a whole lot that cut across. This is one big way that SMEs are going to be supported. So if you're not getting support from your national base, there is a continental bias also that is coming in to support. Beyond that, I remember the last time I visited the Secretary General of AFTA, he said his goal is to secure almost about $1 billion to support SMEs. And I'm glad if you come to Ghana, they're about to launch what we call the Chamber of SMEs. And this is good because once you belong to a chamber, an association, you collaterally go in for support. And in Ghana, for example, the Exim Bank is mandated to support exporting activities. The Ghana Export Promotion Authority has also waved in with a 10-year development plan to expand the broad-based SME plan. And so, yes, every approach is different, but I'm happy to announce that there's a continental dimension to the support of SMEs. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mr. Apple. I mean, you've led me on to something that I was going to ask just around local entrepreneurs and product standardization, for example. But I think what is also important is often we hear that support is available. And then when we are on the ground trying to get the support, it's not accessible. So I think it's really important that if the support is there, it really does need to be accessible to entrepreneurs, to the local environment, and it isn't a bureaucratic process. So I'm hoping that there are simplistic ways of going about it so that we get that support.
Basically, it's going to be simplistic if we position ourselves well. Yeah. For instance, in terms of our corporate governance, okay, because you cannot just come out of an idea which there is no direction to it, and then you get funding easily. No, it's not going to be like that. We are also looking not only at trading goods, there's also trading services, okay, where the service sector, the intangible goods, also has about 49% of GDP contribution. That service industry, you might not necessarily have to go to another member state to really do business. And the critical example is, if I feel, for example, in the service industry, one of the priority sectors is education. And I say that one area that is going to help is the conserving of monies we pay of important professionals. So, for example, if I have a certain professional background under the education and the priority sectors in trade and service, and I feel like moving out of my region to another region to really develop or to offer my services, I'm good to go because there's free movement of people. And that's what we call exporting of skills. That an SMB can take it up of promoting that direction. Finally, it is simplistic because under AFTA, there are processes. If you say you want to export under AFTA, you go to your national institutions, for example, in Ghana, either you go to Ghana National Chamber of Commerce or the customs and say, okay, these are my products I want to export. Those products must fall within what we call the tariff concessions or the tariff lines that have been offered by the country you are exporting your product to. So that gives you the necessary financial support. For example, if you are exporting product ABC, and then country ABC says this does not fall within my tariff offers, so I will not going to accept it. Who can finance that project? But if you are sending that product or that particular item and it falls within the tariff lines or tariff offers that country ABC is looking for, and you expand the volume, surely you need to have that financial support. And so this one is about really boosting export. And I think that is going to be possible.
Thank you. Thank
you, Irene.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Rose, so are there any exemptions to the kind of business that qualifies to benefit from AFTA?
Oh, yes, definitely. And that is why I mentioned that only 90% of the tariff lines are the ones which are going to be liberated. There are some countries who want to be able to protect infant industries until they are able to be stable enough for them to compete with other products from other countries. And then also there's a 3% which are sensitive goods. And, you know, these are things like probably, you know, ammunition or maybe guns. You know, there are those sensitive goods that you would not want to put it in a trade agreement or commit in a trade agreement. You know, also items to do with maybe you know, commodities which are abridged maybe to the culture or the moral grounds of a particular society or a particular country. So the countries have a reserve of 3%, which they do not have to liberalize at all. And then the 7% they can progressively liberalize. But 90% of the product lines, the countries who are signatories to the agreement must be able to liberalize them, which 90% is still very good.
Right.
And we can be able to take advantage of it as a trading community and as countries. And also, let me just add also that it is not only trading in goods, trading also services is included in this. And in the first part of the negotiation, we had the trade in goods and trade in services. And then the second phase of the negotiation will include issues to do with competition, intellectual property rights, and also investment and e-commerce. So it's not only trade in goods that is included in the agreement, it includes investment and also trade in services.
Right. Thank you so much, Rose. I'm just thinking, as you know, we don't seem to have a lot of these forums, and I guess after we've just begun this journey in Africa, and you know, when I'm speaking to you and asking you these wonderful questions, you've got all the answers, all of the panelists. How do we get this information out beyond, you know, the webinars that we're doing? Is it easy to kind of engage with the institution and find this information out? How do we make it simplistic, practical, and easy for the entrepreneur to participate?
Okay, to answer that question, it lies in two areas. And two areas, I mean, it is the responsibility of the Secretariat to cascade this information in a very simple terms. For anybody who would be able to benefit from this agreement, to benefit from it. So if it means looking, you know, translating it into the different languages, if it means simplifying the message so that it doesn't have so much jargon for anybody to be able to understand. So that is on one area. The Secretariat should be able to have a communication plan to be able to cascade this through the different channels. If it is TV, if it is social media, if it is, you know, all that is possible to reach out to the different population that have interest in this in the different countries. The second role is of that of member states. The member states who are signatories to this should be able to put communication plans or communication strategies in the national strategies for implementing this agreement. And these communication strategies should be aimed at simplifying the message and also just being very specific to how the country can be able to benefit, because different countries have different tariff commitments, and that message needs to be customized for SMEs to be able to understand, for the big multinationals to be able to understand. And I'm very privileged because I sit in the National Implementation Committee for the Kenyan one, for the one which is implementing the CFTA strategy for Kenya. And I can confidently tell you that our implementation strategy has a communications component that aims at reaching every individual or every citizen in Kenya who would be interested in taking advantage of this agreement.
Thank you so much, Rose. So before I go on to Mr. Musa, let me just pause just to do a little bit of a reset for those that have just joined us. We're talking about accelerating intercontinental trade through capacity building. I have seen the chat box, and the chat box is blowing up, and I will get to those questions that you've asked. So thank you very much. And please keep them coming. I mean, there will be a section where we will go through your questions and answers and just help us to facilitate the conversation further. So I'm going to go to Mr. Musa, and then I will go back to the chat box, and then we'll ask some questions. And of course, Mr. Musa, we are talking about capacity building. So I'm going to ask you some questions around that. And I know we've had many conversations around capacity building, particularly for the youth. And what we have been always talking about is how do we get the youth ready to participate? You know, but I'm particularly passionate about the future of work. And I think that the pandemic has kind of brought that a lot closer to us. And I want us to delve into what are the opportunities. I'm sure there are many youth listening to this. What are the opportunities for the youth when we talk about AFTA?
Thank you so much. AFTA is youth. AFTA itself is youth because it's just the beginning of it. When we define youth in the African context, we are talking about people between the ages of 15 and 35. And this age group forms 1/3 of the continent's population. There's about 400 million people. And this is the people who form majority of our workforce, exuberant, youthful, with energy, with passion, with innovation. What is lacking now is the space and the investment for all these things to blossom. So as a continent, we have not done so well in the times past to harness the dividend that this youthful population can bring us. If you compare this to other parts of the world, Europe is reaching growth saturation, growth level because they don't have youth anymore. Japan, the Koreas, and even in the US, they are all reaching that level where it's like a ceiling. You are not going anywhere because you don't have the young people anymore. But fortunately for Africa, we still have our youth because we are still having a very high birth rate here. And this is not something to fight. We don't need to have a fight with our population size. We just need to see how we turn that population into what something meaningful. So for the young people especially, I was leading a lot of youth projects whilst I was inside the AU Commission. And what was lacking more in my work was that understanding of who young people are, what they bring to the table, how can we engage them, and how can we utilize that potential that is in these young people. These are the missing paradox in the African context. It's something that if you look around the continent, not much is being done about it in terms of investment, in terms of even policy-wise, in terms of so many things. We are not doing much. I think it was, Afo can correct me, I think it was later days that youth and women were captured in the AFTA framework. It was recently that youth and women were captured as part of the AFTA strategic framework. This tells you what we are going through as a continent. Many of these young people are found in our educational institutions. So there need to be a deliberate effort especially with the AFTA Secretariat to work closely with educational institutions to take the capacity building, to take the awareness campaigns into those schools. When I was in China, China has a policy that those of you are aware, they have the Belt and Road Initiative, which almost every African country is a party to have signed onto this China Belt and Road Initiative. In the Chinese universities, there are a lot of courses that they are offering now in the Belt and Road Initiative. There are a master's program now that they are offering in Belt and Road Initiative. There are student organizations across the universities on Belt and Road Initiative. So you can't go a day without not hearing something about Belt and Road Initiative. Whether you are a person on the street, whether you, which aspect of the Chinese society you are part of, there's not a single day you go without hearing what they call Belt and Road Initiative, because they have integrated it into every aspect of their society. So for young people, I always say young people have two destinies. The destiny that the society, the government, the parents can offer them, and another destiny that they can offer themselves. So if your country, if your president, if your parents are not offering you that destiny, that doesn't mean you should retire yourself to a state of maybe nothingness. You have to wake up and say, I'm going to inherit my own future. I'm going to pass it on to my kids. So you shouldn't just sit back and say, my country is not doing this for me, my government is not doing this for me. You as a young person has to know that this is your own destiny and you have to fight for it. And so for young people, we have to be passive, not passive, we have to be very active in the after implementation. We have to demand to know about it. We have to demand to be part of it. We have to demand for all the commitments that our various governments, our various leaders have committed to. We have to always be on them, advocate, organize, and occupy spaces, and make sure that we bring innovation, we bring passion, we bring energies into the after implementation.
Mr. Musa, do you think that we have the institutions that enable that type of thinking, that type of behavioral change, that type of assertiveness on the continent?
Unfortunately, I would say it's full-time no, because I've been in this space for more than 10 years. And as a young person myself, I know what I'm lacking in terms of my development. When you travel to the US, you travel to China, you go to Europe, you know that when you come to Africa, there's a lot you are lacking as a young person in terms of your development. Unfortunately, our educational institutions haven't taken that responsibility to say, we are not just passing out graduates, we are passing out people who are going to develop our country, people who are going to drive the development of our nation and our continent. So first of all, the universities who today have the biggest responsibility of training these young people have to know that the usual work of teaching mathematics, teaching all these courses is not enough to prepare our young people for the world that they are going to be part of. We need to redesign, look at our curriculum, see where it's lacking, and inject modern and current trends that allow these young people to come out of our universities and be prepared to contribute. Our government have their own responsibilities to make sure that we don't just come out with policies, but also we follow it with practical and strategies. And also, most importantly, the financial investment into those institutions that allow these young people to be to have that full capacity to contribute to the continent's development.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So we're going to continue that conversation. I'm going to move over now to some of the interesting comments that have been put in the chat box. So if I can get the panelists to come back on camera so that anyone who feels they want to take this question can. So if I can get Rose and Mr. Affle back on, I would appreciate that. So we have a question from Miss Efwa, and her question is, are there any lessons we can learn from the European Union, specifically in relation to countries who may want to exit, as we have seen in Brexit? So is anyone on the panel who is keen just to give a brief kind of response and your take on that question?
Thank you. I think that let me respond to Mr. Musa's first comment about the women and children. The traditional agreement has not yet created a protocol on women and youth yet. And it's one of the things that the Secretary General is fighting so hard to push to the heads of states at one of their summits so that they can adopt it as one of the traditional protocols. So, but they're going to have a conference on women this year, per my understanding. So that is a good news that is coming. In terms of the lessons, I have always said there's a need for us to inculcate this as a curriculum. In fact, the other part of our, I would say, the consultative drafting process, my group proposed that we have a curriculum across Africa in different languages for all schools so that they will learn it. The problem with the European Union and co is that they did not take it as a kind of lesson, as a kind of course study. And I'm happy that if you come to Ghana, the University of Ghana Business School and University of Science and Technology have adopted it as a course of study. I'm wishing that to go to the high schools for us to study about this whole agreement. And so the first lesson is that it should be an educational probe, so that we will really teach our kids in different languages, our students, to understand and build upon it. That is very, very key. Then secondly, this agreement provides exit clauses. This agreement provides exit clauses. It says after 5 years, if you feel you want to withdraw, you can withdraw. So the 5 years is also not going to be because they say 5 years you can exit. There will be arbitration issues here and there, settlement or dispute. I mean, you'll be discouraged from exiting, but the agreement gives you 5 years after implementation if you want to withdraw. But I don't think that we'll get to that point where a country will have to use the exit clause of withdrawing after 5 years. Thank you.
Sure. We certainly hope not. And of course, there are these lessons. So, Ms. Efwa, I really hope that we've been able to respond to your question. If I move on to, is there an agreed currency that will be used for trading? And what are the risks stroke downfalls do we foresee? So any of the panel, Rose or Musa or Mr. Affle, if you want to tackle that question, you are able to.
Well, I was waiting for Rose, I can start. The Continental Free Trade Agreement is envisaged in the whole Agenda 2063 of the African Union. So that is what we must all understand. And the single market or this agreement is just one of it. The next phase will be one custom union. Then the next phase will be one passport and one currency. And that currency is where we're going to have one central bank and one African currency. That looks too far, but it's not too far because you can look at West Africa. West Africa has gone about 70% what we call the ECO, where we're having a single West African currency. The Continental Free Trade does not necessarily have one currency, but rather it has developed a payment system called the Pan-African Payment System. The Pan-African Payment that was sponsored by the Afrasian Bank, where it is a settlement of payment system, where instead of transfer in terms of payment by exporters or by businesses or traders, you have to get the currencies of their in a normal ordinary terms, get the currency of another country, and that one difficulty. This Pan-African payment system, which is integrating most banks, most central banks, you can be in your country and pay in the denomination of wherever you are exporting to, without necessarily going through that difficult. So there is no currency necessarily, but there's a one payment settlement system that is being piloted. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. It sounds interesting. When you said one passport, I thought, I wonder if we will ever get to that point. I think that would be an interesting place to be. So thank you very much. Another question here is, we continue to import products from Europe, Americas, India, and China. Do we have the capacity to supply goods and services across Africa to beat the competitive markets? And then I think someone then goes on to say, what is in place to stop companies simply importing from China and India, etc., in one country and simply selling across AFTA region instead of driving the sale of raw materials and finished products within the AFTA region? Who would like to take that? Today,
China is seen as the global, manufacturing hub, and manufacturing for everybody. And so, but I am very optimistic about Africa's manufacturing capacity in the coming decades. Like Affle will say, it might not happen immediately soon, but we have good factors in place that can make it happen overnight. And what I mean by overnight is Africa has always had the capacity to produce, whether through our own traditional ways, even if we don't have the requisite sophisticated machineries, which we can buy at any day if we wish. And so these are things that tells you that it's just a mindset that we need to just tune our mind to the fact that, of course, one of the important factors of production is the input. And Africa has the input. We have the raw materials. The second thing might be labor. And labor, we talk about the young people. We talk about by 2025, Africa is going to have the largest workforce globally. And our young people are just, we keep adding numbers to our youthful population. And so if you look at these two factors, if you look at the increasing size of the middle class, internet penetration, and all these small factors, you put them together, you realize that we can, at any day, any time given, become a manufacturing hub. And my personal predictions are that let's give ourselves up to like 2050, China will have to enjoy this particular crown for the next few decades, but it's going to shift. China, as I've lived there, China is also, even now, China has reached overcapacity in certain industries, and they are looking to relocate factories. And so what personally I've done with my company, because we have an office in China, is to work with African governments, with African private sector, and say, China is offloading factories. If we have something that we can match with, why don't we go in terms with them to take over some of these factories into Africa? Because there are options. China has an option to take all these factories to nearby Southeast Asian countries, which is closer, which is much cheaper for them. But if Africa can also position ourselves well, we can, apart from building our own manufacturing capacities, we also benefit from the overflow of maybe manufacturing capacity from China. And hopefully we can take over the baton when China is leaving the scene as the global manufacturing hub. Yes, so we have the capacity only if we wish to take it.
I think what I would add to that conversation, and I don't particularly have the answer, but you know, I think we have to think on the continent that the way we are structured and organized is very different to the way China is, because they were able, at the end of the day, one country, although a very big country with lots of different provinces. We are talking about Africa being individual countries with completely different culture, completely different ways of thinking, and trying to bring that together in order to be seen as one, as unison, I think is a very, very challenging task. And I would have thought from an AFTA perspective, really, we can have the policies, we can have the procedures, we can have the structures. But if we don't fundamentally, you know, look into the cultural aspects of how we do business, the academia from the very beginning of education in the way we think and approach things, I think that we will find ourselves in very challenging waters, and maybe we will miss opportunities. Anyway, that's my contribution to that. And so I will move on to another question. I'm just going to try and get through these questions. So if the panelists can kind of just be a little bit succinct so that we can get through all of the questions. So just to summarize, we've got illegal migration of people and the trafficking of the most vulnerable, right? So for example, always generally becomes part of the free trade movement. So where we're looking at borders, what policies are governments considering to avoid these issues, and the fact that these issues would put a strain on some countries? So I think, Rose, you've got your hand up. Do you want to attempt to answer the question?
Okay, I wanted to answer the question that was not answered about importation of commodities maybe from China and it infiltrating the continent, and how will that, I think that was a very important question that we've not been able to answer. And how I would answer that question is that one of the tools of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement for implementation is the rules of origin. And the rules of origin is basically what confines a product as having originated from, you know, the African continent. These rules are still currently being negotiated. And once we have completed the negotiation of these rules, then there will be a clear demarcation of what product entitles, or can be able to lay claim to having been originated from the African continent, and what cannot be able to, be said to be originated from the African continent. And this will prevent, that illegal trade of you importing a commodity from China, putting a label, and exporting it, to another African country, benefiting from the reduced tariffs that the CFTA is going to accord such products. So there is already a mechanism that is there in place, and the customs organizations in the different countries, and also the chambers of commerce, will be giving a certificate of origin, which certifies that they have inspected and they have confirmed that this good originates from the African continent. And there will be several thresholds. It doesn't have to mean that your product has to be 100% originated from the continent. You can be able to have, a few inputs that are imported from outside the continent, because we appreciate that we do not have everything in the African continent. There are some things we might have to import, but that doesn't mean that 90% of your product is imported and then only 10% is manufactured in the African continent. So I thought that was a very important question that we should not skip.
Sure. Thanks
and
so
I think
much.
Aful wanted to answer the next question. I think he can answer it in the one of
Mr. Aful, did you want to answer the question?
I wanted to add a bit to what Rose said. The question of the question of rules of origin is 81% ready, and it's already in force. It's left with about the rest of the 82% is ready. The rest of the 18% or so is not yet ready. It's being negotiated. That is the bulk. The 18% is the crucial one that fits into what Rose just said. That has to do with the value additions. The value additions. What is the cap? And after is capping it at 61%, 60 to 61%, because it recognizes that you cannot produce every input here. And so you will need input-based imports from other developed countries. That is not going to, I remember in my submission, I said earlier that the African Continental Free Trade is not coming to do away with existing regional agreements. That doesn't mean that once after it's there, you can import from other countries. No, but the difference on the free trade is that the free trade is signaling preferential treatment, meaning that if Kenya is going to have an agreement with country C, that agreement that Kenya is going to have with country C, if Kenya is going to give preferential treatment to country C, Kenya cannot turn around and give most favored nation approach to country to a member state under the rules of origin, which is very important. Whatever concessions you are going to give to a country outside Africa, the free trade area, you must accord the same concessions to a member country. Let me explain it further. If Ghana decides to have a certain agreement that a third party country is trying to come within the free trade zone with goods and whatever it is, and you are going to accord that third party country certain concessions, which is not supposed to be so. Whatever agreement you're going to have with that country, go ahead. However, make sure that when you grant that concessions, you will not deny one of your member states the same concessions. However, even that will not even happen, because the third party state will surely not be allowed within the free trade when you have not met these tariff concessions. That is very key. And so we are operating under preferential treatment, and the rules of origin are going to guide the type of goods that may come in. The agreement goes against what we call dumping as well. And so like Rose said, we are expecting 61% of all these finished products, whether you imported from outside for input, or within 61%. Because of the cost factory price. That is basically all this noise about rules of origin of 61% and what have you. And so that is going to guide against this. And Rose mentioned something earlier which connects to this, how we call the 10%. The 10% has to do with the exclusive products and sensitive products. These 10% are goods that every country has been given a certain liberalization or a certain room and saying, look, I am not going to trade anything that comes near this 10%. And these areas are even forced to boost primary industries or boost growing industries in various countries. Now, let me quickly jump to the question about security. In terms of migration issues, as I said earlier, the Continental Free Trade is really focused on intra-African trade and boosting intra-African trade. However, immigration issues under the Abuja Treaty, where you are supposed to allow free movement of people, is also really, it comes under scrutiny. It's not because the agreement says free movement of people, then every activity about people movement is not checked. No, that is not the case. But everything that is going to be a barrier to trade is progressively being eliminated. That is the key difference between this. And there are serious security issues that the African Union is putting in place beyond just the AFTA, which falls under the Agenda 2063. Remember the IOM issues. We have the TANA forums that are all within the African Union that looks at security of migration. So that is really something that will be checked.
Excellent, thank you. And there's a question, I guess a bit of a follow-up around relocation. So I'm reading somebody's comments in the audience here. Relocation of Chinese factories to Africa is generally for cheap labor, and workers are not afforded the same rights. We already see maltreatment of workers in the mining sector and tomato paste factories set up on the continent. African workers are generally treated as second-class citizens in their own country. What controls are we putting in place to stop this? This is somebody's perspective. Any comments, any sort of quick comment on that?
Yeah, I want to quickly pass a comment before maybe Rose and maybe...
Yes, please do. Please go ahead, Mr. Musa.
Yeah, I think I'm the one who mentioned about the relocation of factories. And
yes.
If you look at history of industrialization and development and manufacturing, every world, every continent has benefited from such policies. Today, China manufactures for the whole world because China has benefited from German technology. They've benefited from technology from the US. They've benefited from technology from Japan. So it's not new that as a continent that you are developing, or as individual countries, we also seek to learn from or pick something. What we don't want is the copy and just pasting. When you copy, you come and adapt to your local situation. And that is what we Africans and what I've seen in our engagement with the international partners that we are not doing. We are not adapting, we just copy and we want to come and just implement, which is not possibly going to be easy in given your circumstances. If you look at these labor issues, these are all negotiations. And those of us who have been part of these negotiations knows that Africa doesn't negotiate enough. African leaders don't negotiate enough in terms of our contracts, in terms of our agreement with China or any part of the world. Our negotiations are normally bad for our people, and for our national and continental development. And that one, the world is a capitalist world. Nobody's gonna come and pamper you. Nobody's gonna come and teach you how to handle negotiations. You have to go to the table with something strong. You have to go and demand for whatever you want. And so for that one, especially those of us who have China orientation, people say, China is going to colonize Africa. No, Africa is going to allow itself to be colonized. Because at the end of the day, when somebody comes to your home, especially, I wouldn't be talking about colonization of the past, but current colonization is, if you allow yourself, then you'll be taken over by someone else. So what we as Africans need to do, especially in negotiations, is to know what we want and push for it. Because whether it's human rights, whether it's cheap labor or whatever, you have to negotiate, you have to ask for it, you have to demand for it when people come to your country. So those ones, the international laws, trade and human rights and all that, that can be used to control that. But yet again, the most important thing is to go and negotiate for what you want.
Sure. Okay, thank you. I think before Chrissy comes in with some questions from social media, let me just read this question to the panel. Some countries or regional blocs, the West, the East, already have existing agreements with the EU and other third countries, etc. Will AFTA in due course negotiate new agreements with the EU and other third-party countries? If yes, what happens to the existing agreements? So that's probably Mr. Affel, if he's available. I think he might have dropped off. Mr. Affel, I think he might have dropped off. Okay, we'll come back to that. Kwesi, do you have questions from the social media?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Irene. Most of the questions have been answered by the panelists, but I think about 4 are crucial. One has to do with language divide. And so the person says that Africa is a multilingual continent. We have the Lusophones, the Anglophones, the Arabophones, and the Francophones. How do we ensure that AFTA is being made available to all to understand and ensure its implementation? The second one is how do we deal with ethnic conflict and issues like xenophobia and crisis in Africa if we want to trade together among ourselves? I think issues of security is important and we need to look at it again. All right. And the next is how do we popularize the AFTA? And I think that that has also been tackled. The last question, which is very important, what is the role of the regional economic communities in the implementation of AFTA with respect to data, standardization, harmonization of trade tariffs on the continent? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we've lost Mr. Affel. So Rose, is there any question that has been raised that we'd like to hear your response on?
I would like to respond on the question to do with the regional economic communities. Okay. And in terms of, I think the question was on harmonization standards and basically how they relate to the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. I think Mr. Affel had mentioned that the regional economic communities were involved in negotiating the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. And if you look at one of the articles in the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, it gives powers to the regional economic community, or it says that it talks about that the regional economic community, the CFTA will not dismantle the regional economic communities. So any higher levels of integration that have been achieved, for example, the ESC is one of the most progressive, research found it, is one of the most progressive regional economic communities in the continent, whereby we have already even achieved a customs union. So in essence, that what that means is that when the ESC is negotiating, it is negotiating, the countries are negotiating, but whatever the countries are offering must be accepted by the other member countries within the regional economic community. And also in terms of standards, in terms of sanitary and phytosanitary standards, in terms of procedures, the regional economic communities and the countries who are member states have also committed that they are going to work together with the Secretariat to harmonize these standards to ensure that there is fewer non-tariff barriers and therefore making trade much easier. So the CFTA has not come to replace the regional economic communities. In fact, it is promoting it and involving it in all the steps that it is taking.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Musa, do you have a contribution?
Yes, I just wanted to touch briefly on the popularization. What normally will happen is that, and it's already happening, is that the popularization will focus on the educated ones, the elite, and those who have access to internet, those who have access to the big rooms and all that. But how do we ensure that the average African knows about this? And especially as we have mentioned, we have about over 60% of our businesses being small and medium. And so how do we ensure that our office in Accra here focuses on international business and trade and investment? And what we are realizing is that when you come locally, most of our local companies or institutions don't know simple and standards, international trade documentations, and simple things that allow them to be able to access bigger and international market. So a lot of capacity building has to also go down, very down to the average African. I'll give an example with the Agenda 2063, which until now still remains a mystery document to many Africans. Go on the street and it's not even on the street. Go to our ministries, go to our higher institutions and ask them about Agenda 2063. Nobody knows about it. And so we have to really, if we want AFTA to work, we need to know which people and how we communicate. I give an example also to a project we started doing voluntarily at the African Union Commission. We told ourselves, how do we take Agenda 2063 on the street of Addis Ababa? Because when you go outside the walls of the AU Commission and you ask the average Ethiopian, what is AU? He just say, oh, this is African president who come to Addis Ababa every year to have meetings. That's all they know about the AU. The average Ethiopian who is outside the AU compound don't know anything about the African Union itself, not to talk about its programs, its policies, and all that. So what we did on our own was to take Agenda 2063 to every person, where the musicians are meeting. Unfortunately for AFTA, it addresses almost everybody. Whatever you think you are doing, you are a student, you are a grandmother, you are whatever you think you are doing on your day-to-day basis, AFTA speaks to you, AFTA touches you directly. And so it is very important that we know how to enter all these small spaces with a message and let the people be the drivers of the AFTA. Thank you on that.
Thanks so much. I know there are many questions that have come through, and I'm very aware that some of our panelists have to step out because we were due to wrap up at 5. So I'm just going to ask, because I think Mr. Affel has to step away. I'd like to, if Chrissy will allow, I know that we've got 2 questions, but I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to them. But I just want to get your closing remarks. And if we then have time, we can go to the questions. So, Mr. Affel, let me start with you. It's been an absolute pleasure. You've given us so much insight and so much knowledge. And I think that we'd love to hear from you again in the future to tap into your expertise and your experience. So what are your closing remarks for the session today?
For having me. I'm happy to have seen my colleagues and everyone who participated. I end up with only 1 or 2 sentences that if you divide this wealth creation expected revenue of about 3.4 trillion to expected population of 1.2 billion people, you're going to have every African having about $2,833. If you convert that to Ghana, here you're going to have about 16,000 cedis. That is way enough to take us from the poverty line of 5.5 wage a day. So I can start something with 16,000 Ghana cedis as an entrepreneur. And so everybody should be interested in this agreement. And like Mr. Moses said, this agreement has even made African Union more popular because everybody's concerned about wealth, sustainability, sustenance, something, doing business, innovation, entrepreneurship, manufacturing, all these form together under AFTA, and that is what is making African Union even more popular. And so this is the time the academia, the media, everybody should be interested. And I also urge our institutions, like the Ministries of Trade, national institutions, to take it upon themselves to really descend and decentralize this information, because I like the Egyptian approach. They've devoted almost about 20 billion, almost dollars or whatever, to the commitment of establishing this African Continental Free Trade Agreement. This is the opportunity we have. This is the chance. If we don't see to the full implementation of this agreement, we'll never have the opportunity again. And thank you very much for this and for having me.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it, and we wish you all the very best. Rose, can we have you back on camera and you can share your closing remarks?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'd just like to say thank you for having me. And what I'd just like to say that this is a life-changing agreement for the African continent. For a long time, the continent has been, featured in negative light in media platforms overseas, and we've been thought of as the dark continent. And this has been rightfully so in some times, because we've seen issues to do with civil strife, we've seen issues to do with wars in Africa, hunger and all that. But the solution to the problems we have in the African continent do not lie in aid, and do not lie in wallowing and just asking the West to assist us all the time. It lies in self-reliance. And this agreement symbolizes the step that Africa is taking to rely on itself by increasing intra-Africa trade, which will be able to lift many lives out of poverty. So I would just like to say, let us keep the momentum, let us spread the message. Yes, not many people have this message, but if you can be able to pass this message to another person, we will be able to get the message out there, and we can make a difference, even if it is in one person's life. Thank you very much for having me, and I enjoyed this conversation this evening.
Thank you so much, Rose. We really appreciate your time and your insight and your expertise, and we can't wait to continue the conversation. Mr. Musa, your closing remarks, please.
Thank you, Irene, for the wonderful steering of this particular session. We've made the most out of it, and I also want to thank the AIE team for putting this together. We look forward to working together yet again, and making AFTA work for Africa and Africans. Because AFTA can be successful, but maybe not helping or benefiting Africans. So we must make sure that when AFTA is successful, we as Africans are also successful, because we are driving it and we are benefiting. And on my last closing remarks would be that we shouldn't just come here to talk, we should also come here to trade, because that is the actual work. And so I throw the challenge to everybody out there that if you want to trade, please reach out to any of us. We are here in Accra, our office is in Accra, and we work with partners in Kenya and South Africa, Nigeria, and we are trying to see how best we get the real goods moving across this country. So if you are looking forward to join such a the trading train, please reach out and let's see how we move the goods and services across Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Musa. We've enjoyed the conversation and your perspectives, and we certainly look forward to engaging you again. Christy, I'm just going to give my closing remarks and then I'll hand back to you as the MC. I've certainly enjoyed the conversation. I think from my perspective, many more conversations should occur. I think often we do a lot of conversations when we're talking about our own countries, and I think it's high time that us as Africans come together and talk about what we can do together, because I think, scale, coming together, our differences are unique and can be our unique proposition, our selling proposition. Of course, we were talking about capacity building, particularly for the youth. I think it's incredibly important that the policymakers, we really do look at starting from education and what kind of education we are providing to our youth, so that we can do a couple of things. We can actually realize the dream and the potential of Africa that comes together as one, and really be a force to reckon with. I mean, like I mentioned before about the future of work, Africans can participate, and imagine coming together as a continent and being able to do that. So I would urge you all on the webinar today to seek information. Sometimes the information doesn't come to our doorstep. So it's really important to take the time out to seek information, find out what you can do, how you can benefit as an entrepreneur, as a business leader, as an individual, where you can participate. I think it's important to do that and get on that train now as opposed to later. I think today we discussed, what is AFTA? We keep talking about AFTA in Accra. We see a wonderful, shiny building, and we think, what are they doing in there? Do they understand our challenges? Have they thought about the things that have gone before us? Have they made certain decisions? We understand now who benefits potentially, who can participate, what capacity buildings that we need, how can entrepreneurs get access And I think what I've taken away is this is good for Africa. So this is about us taking that opportunity and running with it. So I leave you with this. Thank you so much, Eric and Kwesi, for affording me the opportunity to engage with you and moderate this session. I've certainly learned a lot from it, and I look forward to our next engagement. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. It's not enough to you, excellent moderator. I told you that once we have Mrs. Irene steering affairs of this discussion, we are going to have the best out of it, and you have really lived up to expectation. Congratulations, and we appreciate your excellent moderation. And also to our excellent panelists, you've been very fantastic and phenomenal. You've given us great insight and shared a lot of knowledge, skills, and expertise with us. I think that I have picked a lot. I just don't want to be tempted to kind of wrap up because our excellent moderator has done so. But I think that there are a few key take homes for me personally as a higher education expert. I love the fact that you centered the whole discussion in the spectrum of higher education and the role education must play in ensuring that we're able to implement the ACTA. And now on this note, I'm very much happy that we have been joined rather lately, but very important, by Dr. Beatrice Njenga. She is a Deputy Vice Chancellor of International Leadership University in Kenya, and she was once the head of education of the African Union Commission under HRST. So Dr. Beatrice Njenga, thank you so much. I'm sure that you may have heard there's education bit, which I think that as education stakeholders will play a role. I like the fact that we, the Secretary General of ACTA also would want to set up $1 billion for SMEs in Ghana, and even go a step further to establish a chamber for SMEs, because we do know that 90%, I may be wrong, of our trade environment are made up of small scale industries, SMEs, and then also medium enterprises made up of women more, and then young people. So that is also a very liberating and good news for us as young people. And also the fact that we need to have our national strategies also in place. So Ghana must have a strategy, Kenya has it, should have it, and all the 54 countries must have it. Together, it feeds into the regional economic community strategy. Then overall, we can feed into the entire continental strategy. So thank you so much. I have learned a lot. And I know that our distinguished participants may have also picked a lot. It was very engaging. They gave a lot of comments. And we promise you that this is just the beginning. Every quarter, we'll bring you some of these stimulating engagement, because as AIE Network, we believe that dialogue is one of the best tools to make sure that we achieve the Africa we want. And that is all that we have available. So every quarter, we'll bring you excellent moderators, excellent facilitators to ensure that we are able to have a good story when we want to evaluate after 2060 or 2030 or 2035. We have a good story to share with everyone. So thank you, distinguished participants, those of you who joined us from social media, those of you who joined us on the platform. We appreciate your contribution. Please, a good conversation is the one that never ends. And as Irene said, let's go back into our various countries, our various work places, and make sure that we spread this good news, make sure everybody gets to know what AFTA is and what we, the role that we all have to play as captains of industry. So thank you. We'll be seeing you once again in the second quarter.